next speaker is James Fell. Where's James? Just wave. Oh, hey. James, I wore a t-shirt in honor of James. I don't know if you can see this in the background, but it's... Squirrels. So I'm reading a little bit about it. And I've read read some of his... I'm just getting his emails recently, so I've just learned about him, and I'm just getting into him. But, so welcome James up here. If you want one of these t-shirts, there's 73 cents on Temu. Cheap everywhere. But go on up, James.
Bit of a Luddite here. No presentation, just very, very analog. You gonna join me? Thanks, everyone. I had pretty significant surgery back in November, and I couldn't work out for 2 months afterward. And so when it came to getting back into shape, I thought I'll take a break from alcohol. So I didn't drink for a few months until last night. And so I'm kind of hungover, and if I throw up, it's not nerves, it's just booze. Okay, let's begin. As you may know, I'm a historian. Sorry, historian. Yes, there will be profanity. Human history was very, very corpsey. There was a lot of death. Kind of like I'm reminded of that old episode of The Simpsons with Grandpa running around pointing, going, "Duh!" That was kind of what it was like. It was, to put some numbers on it, prior to the 20th century, once you were born, you had a 50% chance of not seeing your 15th birthday. Didn't matter how rich you were, where you were born. By the time you were born, it was a 50% chance that you would die before the age of 15. 25% chance you would die before the age of before your first birthday. And then that kind of fucks with people's heads. When half of people are dying before their mid-teens, it has a tendency to affect, the way a society evolves and the way people think and what they believe. And that may be that in terms of the earliest religious beliefs that we know of involved ancestor worship. They were so big into the whole, because everybody knew so many people that had fucking died, we might as well pray to them, right? They were so big into ancestor worship that they actually buried them under the floor of their houses so they could just, as they're walking around doing their chores, it's like, "Hi, Grandma, how's it going?" And so religion evolved very gradually for a lot of different reasons. One is creating rituals around praying for a good harvest or for a drought to end or whatever, and that evolves into creating various types of norms of society that allows people to bond together over shared myths. And then they found out that it's like, oh wow, we can use this as a for rewards and punishments in order to enforce various norms and basically do what I tell you to kind of shit. It's like, if I'm the one that speaks to the ancestors, and if you don't do what I say, then I'm going to have your grandma make your penis fall off. And these people were quite ignorant, that they didn't have the luxury of outside information or skeptical thought. It's a lot of this stuff for them was very, it was not easily falsifiable. So what you knew was what you were told. And there are plenty of historians who believe that if it wasn't for religion, we never would have evolved into larger societies, because of these shared myths act as a unifying force that allowed us to grow beyond small bands into larger tribes, and then eventually, city-states and kingdoms and empires, and then the modern democracies such as they are that we have today. And there was a benefit to that, absolutely, because when it acts as a unifying force, you get to band together larger and larger groups that all believe the same shit, even if it is total bullshit, it creates us and them type of mentalities where you want to protect your group and you're willing to fight for it. And so you've got this larger group that can even become militaristic. That's good for defense. It's good for, survival, natural selection. And other people start copying that and it kind of spreads. So there is this concept that if it hadn't been for religion, we never would have, grown beyond hunter-gatherer levels. I think that's probably bullshit. I don't know that there is any way to prove it either way, because humanity is just this grand n=1 experience. We can't go back and use controls and experiments to figure out if we didn't have this propensity for believing in fantastical bullshit. If maybe we'd have a Star Trek future, right? Sorry, Star Wars future one day. May the fourth. The fact. May the Spock be with you. So when I came up with the idea for this presentation a couple months ago, is the idea with ways that religion accidentally made the world a better place. And I don't know if any of you heard me on the radio last week. I was on QR77, and the interviewer, Rob Breckenridge, I listened to it the next day. He did a new intro where he said that I said that religion has been a net positive for humanity. And I never fucking said that. And I don't believe that. So a couple months ago, I told Adrian and Jali that I wanted to talk about ways that, I think there were some ways that religion actually was kind of cool and actually worked out for us. And they said, yeah, great, go for it. So I start researching it. I'm like, fuck. I'm not sure this is actually true. So I may just totally bomb up here because I'm not sure that I even believe what I'm going to tell you. Because the more I research it, the more it's like, wow, shit, it's really fucked up with distance acid. But I should say that, yes, I am an atheist. I was born an atheist, and I had the good fortune to get to say that way because my parents did not give the square root of fuck all about religion. It wasn't talked about. We didn't go to church. I didn't get traumatized by it. I actually remember one time I was about 7 years old. I'm visiting with a friend, and somehow the topic of God comes up because people that are into God love to talk about that shit. And so they found out that I didn't go to church, and his parents were like, oh, you don't go to church? Oh, you don't know what you're missing. You have to come to church with us. Church is so awesome. You're going to love it. And I'm like, well, shit, I'll try anything once. 7 years old, they take me to church. And I'm sitting there and I'm just like, boring. You guys believe this shit? Holy cow. Like, it's just so corny. Definitely not for me. So as a heterosexual, cisgender, white Canadian male, there haven't been a lot of religiously influenced political policies that have had a negative effect on my life. And so I was able to escape that part of it. And I also didn't, have somebody beating me about the buttocks with a Bible telling me I was going to burn in hell. So I don't have a lot of personal negative association with it. Maybe that makes me a little bit more objective. But again, I read a lot of history and I'm like, fuck. So it's kind of funny that with all this research and writing about history, that I know a lot more about religion than most religious people do. One example that comes up, you've heard of the doctrine of Immaculate Conception? Yeah. Everybody thinks that's about virgin birth. Totally different thing. With the virgin birth thing, I kind of get, because, you can't have a savior born with a lot of grunting and sweating and only one person having an orgasm. But I was in the early 19th century, the church decided, not good enough. Jesus can't just be born to a virgin. The virgin needs to be even more pure. So that's what Immaculate Conception is that they decided that Mary, it's about the conception of Mary. Mary was born without that eating the apple original sin bullshit. So it's like Jesus is the extra virgin olive oil savior. And most of them don't know that. And it's like, I'm an atheist. I know this shit. Learn your own fucking Bible. Anyway, so I'm going to forge ahead and try and maybe convince you that sometimes that religion did not completely suck. Separation of church and state. Who's a fan? Yeah, easy crowd. I'm going to try and make an argument that we have Christianity to thank for that. And it's going to meander. There's going to be some ADHD shit. But I'll compare it to, use Islam as an example. Beginning in the 7th century, Islam was a very militaristic religion from the very beginning. It's all about conquest and expansion. And the religion and the leadership, the political leadership, were essentially one and the same, and that really hasn't changed very much in the 13th century since then, which is why we have Islamic theocracies today. So that's an example of religion and politics being fused together. Another example that I can compare Western democracies to is China. China has had the first truly central bureaucratized, very controlling state that's over 2 millennia old. And the role religion played in that was a very subservient one. We had, Buddhism and Confucianism that were tools of the Chinese Empire that they used for control. But there was no powerful Buddhist church that acted as a check on Chinese power. And as a result, we've got 2 millennia of totalitarianism where, the emperor and even their more modern communist leaders pretty much have absolute control. They don't have rule of law. They don't have accountable government. They have rule of do what we fucking tell you to or else. And that's because there wasn't this powerful church to act as a check on their power. And but in the West, with Christianity, things are different. And this isn't because Christianity is superior in any way, or Westerners are superior in any way. It's all religions are bullshit as far as I'm concerned. But it was just luck. It's happy accidents that made it work out for us. And it really starts. One of the best things that could have happened to us, from my opinion, looking back at history, was the fall of Rome, because Christianity started, of course, in the Roman Empire. And, at first they're like, what the fuck's going on here? Let's just nail them to some trees and be done with them. And we'll start allegedly feeding them to the lions. But Christianity continued to grow and become more and more powerful force, to the point that toward the end of the 4th century, Rome says, okay, we're going to make a power move here. We're going to make Christianity the official state religion. For a brief period of time, the Christian church was subservient to the Western Roman Empire. But then, it's like, what's tickling me? There's a plant there. But then, that only lasted a century, because by the end of the 5th century, we've got the fall of Rome. And that was a power vacuum. Guess who stepped into the power vacuum? That was the Christian church. We've got all of these very weak, decentralized Western states. And the church steps in, and they became sort of the leading authority in Western Europe. And they were the most unscientific motherfuckers imaginable. You think those horse paste eating Joe Rogan fans are bad. They look like fucking Einstein compared to the Christian church back then. It was any idea that went beyond what was in their precious book was heretical, and that shit gets you set on fire. And so it was, medieval historians, a lot of them are not fans of the term Dark Ages. I personally am Team Dark Ages. The term, the etymology of the term Dark Ages is boring and stupid, and I'm not going to get into it. But the reason why I'm Team Dark Ages is because, comparatively speaking, Western Europe was this absolutely ignorant backwater compared to the Islamic Empire, China, Japan. Islam, as an example, between the 8th and 12th century, had what was called the Islamic Golden Age, where they were big into science and scholarship, and Baghdad was a major center of learning during that time, and all sorts of cool inventions being made. So you compare that to Western Europe, yeah, fucking Dark Age. China and Japan too, lots of scientific shit going on. And actually, one of the cool things about the Golden Age of Islam was that a lot of the classical Greek knowledge from many centuries before was at risk of being lost. And it was Islamic scholars that found it, translated it into Arabic, and then that filtered through the Islamic Empire into across North Africa, up through, you may know that the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal had been conquered by Islamic forces around the 7th century and was occupied for many centuries afterwards. So that allowed that knowledge, classical Greek knowledge, to filter up through the Iberian Peninsula, get translated into various Western European languages, and filter into Western Europe and help pull their heads out of their asses over a series of centuries. And so, yes, thanks Islam for that. But then, who here is upset when they hear about the burning of the Library of Alexandria? Grand Library of Baghdad, end of the 12th century, equally horrific. So also be sad about that one. That was a Mongol horde that did that, and that brought a swift end to the golden age of Islam. But okay, what's the next thing I'm supposed to talk about? Now I'm going to focus most of the rest of it on Christianity and how the Catholic Church did some things for wholly selfish reasons that ended up working out cool for us. Not so cool for some other people, but it worked okay for us. And so the first one is, one of the things I always wonder about is, why does the church care so much about what I do with my penis? And the answer is money. So I got to meander. I got to ADHD this a little bit. So if I lived in the 7th century and I was married and I died, there'd be a good chance that my younger brother would then marry my widow. Other common things were like cousin marriage, multiple wives, concubines, divorce, all very common. And the church here saw an opportunity and said, no more of that shit. And the reason why those practices were common in the first place, because things were still very tribal back then, strong kinship ties, and it was always all about keeping property in the family. My brother's going to marry my widow to keep the property in the family, because it was really important to have a male heir who lived to adulthood. And half people dying before the age of 15, having a male heir live to adulthood was not all that common. So they had all these strategies: the cousin marriage, the multiple wives, concubines, the divorce. All these things were things that they did in order to increase the likelihood that they could keep that property in the family. And the church banned all of that stuff. And they didn't do it for any kind of moral reasons. It was strictly for greed, because they wanted to break those kinship ties and have people just be more beholden to the church. And they also did something very important, which was they said women are now allowed to inherit property, which was a revolutionary idea, treating women as human beings. And they were not feminists. They didn't give a fuck about women. This was a very nefarious strategy on their part. How they justified it, because they say that, in Christianity, we're all equal in the eyes of the Lord. And so women are equal too. So therefore, they're allowed to inherit property now. No, she doesn't have to marry, her dead husband's younger brother. She can inherit property. And then over time, now we've got all of these childless, wealthy widows that the church says, hey, when you die, if you bequeath that shit to us, pretty sure you're going to go to heaven. It worked like a motherfucker. It worked really well. Within a few centuries, the church was the largest landholder in all of Western Europe. They owned like 30% of the property. So it helps break those kinship ties. It starts spreading this concept of individualism, where people can, kind of break out of this thing that was called the tyranny of the cousins, and have relationships, not just, friendships and marriage and whatever, but, financial relationships outside their family. And so that was these are things that evolve over, they take centuries to really take root and evolve. So that was one big thing that happened that was good, but again, done for selfish reasons. And then we see, we've got this in the latter half of the medieval period, centralized states or monarchies are starting to become more powerful. They're pulling their heads out of their dark age asses and getting a little more centralized, getting more powerful. They're vying for power with the church now. And at the same time, we've also got that classical Greek learning is starting to filter in, where the church got so pissed off about that by the 13th century that they came up with these things called condemnations of 270 something things that you weren't allowed to do or think or read. And it's like, Aristotle, no, fuck that guy. You read you want to get set on fire? Reading Aristotle is going to get you set on fire. And but also at that same time period, there was something called the investiture crisis, which was various monarchs were in control of naming new bishops, new abbots within their territories. And, so you'd have like King Joe would say, well, my younger brother Bob's not busy, so as a power move, I'm going to make him the bishop of wherever the fuck. And the church was like, not Bob. Bob sucks. He's illiterate. He doesn't even believe this shit. You at least got to pretend to believe it. And not only that, but Bishop Bob is married and he has kids. So, when he dies, he's going to give that valuable church property to his kids. And the church was like, no, we don't want that. So the church says that Pope Greg, bunch of numbers, there's a lot of them, Gregory the Seventh, I think, he said, we're going to invest our own bishops, our own abbots. And the Holy Roman Emperor, which you may have heard was neither holy nor Roman, nor an empire, he said, absolutely fucking not. We're going to punt Pope Greg and we're going to put in a new pope. And Pope Greg said, no, fuck you, you're excommunicated. And back then, in the 13th century, being excommunicated was what historians refer to as a big fucking deal. And so the Pope, especially when your title is Holy Roman Empire, it's kind of hard to do that when you're not part of the church anymore. So I think it was Henry IV. So Hank number 4 basically crawls through the snow on his hands and knees and begs the Pope to be let back into the church. And it took some time, but they resolved it where they decided that, okay, we're going to have a bit of a balanced power here. Church is going to be in charge of the spiritual world. You guys can invest your own bishops and abbots, but you have to say that the various monarchs are in charge of, the temporal world. And it created this balance of power. Also, interesting thing that happened during that same time after the investiture crisis was resolved, the church said to their various clergy, no more sex. I mean, they crossed their fingers, they waited. No more kids anyway. And, you're not allowed to get married or have kids. And the various, bishops and abbots and priests and whatnot who were married and had kids, they had a choice. It's like, leave your family or leave the church. And they were pissed. But church stuck to their guns. And the reason why they did that was because they were looking to professionalize, institutionalize the church. They didn't want these bishoprics and abbeys being handed down. So it's all about, these are professional positions that we get to say who fills them. A bishop dies, we get to choose someone based on, politics, merit, whatever, who fills that position. That position's owned and controlled by the church. And what that ended up creating was the Catholic Church kind of became the first modern state in a way, because it was centralized, it was bureaucratized, it was hierarchical, and it had rule of law, which means, a lot of leaders they didn't dispense law, they dispensed justice. They did whatever they felt like. But rule of law is something that is more perpetual. It can last across generations. And you can't just get some new leader that comes in and says, no, fuck all that bullshit. We're doing what I want right now. Rule of law is about one of those things that everyone is accountable to. And, an example of it right now is that, Tangerine Palpatine is currently on trial, criminal trial, and maybe he'll suffer some consequences for it. so that concept was one of the things that the church really helped sort of popularize and became a model for Western democracies. The sort of professionalization and institutionalization of government as it was reflected in the church. Another really important thing about rule of law that helped, Western Europe become so scientifically and technologically advanced and economically advanced as well is how it protects property rights. So if you have the rule of law behind you in terms of property rights, all of a sudden you have motivation to be for social mobility, where you can create inventions or engage in trade and things like that because the law is protecting your property rights. And these things have a tendency to snowball. And it's just another one of those things that helped Western Europe become so technologically advanced. But here's another really big thing that happened. So now we've got growing power of various states. We've also got a really powerful church. That's a balance of power between the two. And what it did is, we've got a Cold War going on between the two groups. And then all the common people kind of watching this going on and realizing that kings are subject to the law and they don't have absolute authority. And I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot of those kings, they would have loved to have been as powerful as those Chinese emperors, but they couldn't because they had this check on their power in terms of a very strong Catholic Church. And that was one of those things that, again, over centuries, it wills away at their power base because more and more people see that these people are not infallible and they don't necessarily have the right to control every aspect of our lives. It starts with things like the Magna Carta. Actually, no, here's a grammar lesson for you. It's not the Magna Carta, it's just Magna Carta. But 1215 was a prime example of the king being subject to the law. And it was just such an important concept that took many years to really come to fruition, that weakened monarchical power across Western Europe and gave more and more power into, the hands of the people. And so I would say that, that was a good thing because nobody wants to live in a dictatorship unless you're a Trump voter. So another big step forward was the Protestant Reformation. The printing press was actually invented in China, but they just whatever, cool toy, kind of like gunpowder. They didn't really do anything with it. They invented it, but they didn't do much with it. Whereas in Western Europe, Gutenberg, created a newfangled printing press, and it's like, I'm going to make some money off this motherfucker because rule of law is going to protect my property rights. And so, around that time, the church was selling tickets to heaven like in the sleaziest used car salesman method possible. And Martin Luther was like, what the fuck? This is bullshit. So he writes 95 Reasons Why the Catholic Church Can Go Fuck Itself, and allegedly nails it to the door of a church in Wittenberg. But what he actually did was he put it in the mail and he sent it to the Archbishop. And that started a Protestant Reformation, which led to a whole bunch of wars in which many millions of people died. But it also promoted literacy because Martin Luther wanted that the church had a stranglehold on teaching the Bible. It's like, if you want to learn what the Bible says, you got to go to church, and some priest is going to tell you. Some dude that hasn't washed his ass in 6 months is going to tell you what the Bible says. And Martin wanted people to be able to find their own way to God. So he translates the Bible into German, and they start printing it off, and people start reading the Bible, and they're like, wow, that priest was actually full of shit because this says this, and it snowballed from there. Then we've got the classical Greek knowledge that's being printed, and people reading that, and it's opening minds, and people are printing pamphlets about these various ideas that they have, and ideas are starting to spread. It's one of these things that helps lead toward the Enlightenment. And a lot of people have these really wonderful ideas about the Enlightenment, and I'm going to shit on those a little bit because the Enlightenment was racist as fuck. You think about, names like Immanuel Kant or Voltaire or David Hume, really racist. Racism's a new concept, believe it or not. It really wasn't thought of as what we think of individual races or racism prior to the 16th century. People, there was still a lot of othering going on, but it was mostly due to religion. So, when they enslaved people, it wasn't because they were a different color so much as it was because they were heathens. It was okay to enslave people because they weren't Christian. But there was also a moral dilemma. It's like, well, what happens if they convert? And so they said, well, maybe we should just not tell them about Jesus. That happened in North America with their slave populations. It's like, we want to keep these people enslaved, so we're not going to, really try and convert them because then we'll have this moral dilemma. The Enlightenment solved that problem for them with the creation of scientific racism. Who's seen the movie Django Unchained? There's a scene in that with Leo DiCaprio, like looking at a skull and talking about indentations and stuff like that. It's called phrenology. That was huge. That was a really big thing, where the Enlightenment used science to justify biological superiority as a concept against other races, saying even if they find Jesus, we still get to enslave them or colonize and conquer them and all that kind of shit. And then Darwin comes along. I know probably a lot of people are fans of Darwin, also big fucking racist. He said that pasty people were much more evolved because of our environment, evolved us to be superior to everyone else, which of course is bullshit. But there's other good things about science. It's like, I almost died last fall, and yay, science, I didn't. Now we've got great things like cesarean sections and epidurals for, dealing with passing a oversized object through an orifice of an insufficient diameter to accomplish such a biological feat. So, there's been some benefits to it, but at the same time, it created a situation during the Industrial Revolution where a lot of Western Europeans came to think as machines being the measure of a person, as to, we are technologically superior, therefore we are also biologically superior. And that gives us the right, we have the best weapons, therefore we have the right to colonize and conquer and exterminate. And that's exactly what they did. They called it a civilizing mission. Rudyard Kipling referred to it as the white man's burden. And they did some terrible, terrible things. And, but I think now, okay, so where are we now? And I think we're in a situation where there's enough knowledge that we can do away with a lot of this bullshit. We don't need to rely on happy accidents or anything. We're intellectually advanced enough to say that, okay, we don't need religion. It absolutely should not have any effect on policy creation. Race is a social construct. There's nothing, biologically meaningful about it in any way. So we need to continue to move forward using our brains and rationality and skepticism into, creating a better world. So how do we do that? Well, I'll give you a historical example. You may have heard of the book Uncle Tom's Cabin. And so that was one person that had a bit of a white savior complex. But so she wrote this book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. And, you've got your slavery abolitionists on one side. You got your pro-slavery shit nuggets on the other side. But you got a lot of people in between. That this book, it was serialized in a magazine to begin with, and then became one of the best-selling books of the era. That you got a lot of people in the middle that are reading this that are starting to really understand a lot of the negative connotations associated with slavery, and it moved the needle toward an entire country going to war in order to end slavery, which of course didn't, solve all the problems, but it made a difference. And that was just because one person decided to tell a story. And, we've seen more recent examples. In 2006, a Black woman named Tarana Burke came up with the concept of Me Too. And, it didn't really catch on until the famous person, Alyssa Milano, in 2017, decided to tweet about it. And that really helped start a new conversation about violence against women. And then it just happened again a few days ago. Women choosing the bear. You know that story? If a woman's alone in a forest, would she rather meet a bear or a strange man? Most women said, fucking bear. And that really blew up over social media. And you got people on both sides. You've got, specifically talking about men, allies saying, I understand why you choose the bear. I support you choosing the bear. And I'm going to tell other men, stop being the reason why she chooses the bear. And then you've got the douchebags that are the reason they choose the bear. But there's also a lot of people in between that are observing and learning and getting their minds changed. And that's, this is stuff that takes decades and centuries. You are all warriors in this battle for rationality and inclusiveness and decency and trying to be more human. And so all I can say is just go do battle. Thanks. Questions?
As we listened to Hamad's talk this morning about as people are sort of moving away from religion or organized religion, do you think that that leaves a void in some of these sort of positive effects?
I don't think so. Like I said, I never had it. I didn't feel like I was missing anything. You can, it's like, I think for a lot of people, it's entertainment value. Like it's comparing Islam and Christianity is like comparing Lord of the Rings and the Belgariad. I think that there are all sorts of things that people can choose to believe in. I personally believe in, the human spirit and our ability to do cool shit and help each other and visit other planets, that kind of stuff. I don't need to believe in something that I can't see or touch or prove, and I think I'm pretty happy about it. Yeah, I think that people who feel a void is maybe it was because it was ingrained into them. That if you start off like me, where it wasn't ran down your throat to begin with, then you don't necessarily know what you're missing. And I've always felt perfectly fine never having been indoctrinated in the first place. I feel grateful that I wasn't. Yeah, I don't know what I'm missing, and I'm fucking happy that I'm missing.
I know recently, as you've been kind of posting about this topic and what you're going to talk about at our conference today, you had a little bit of backlash.
The bear stuff?
Well, the bear stuff, but then also the stuff about talking about any positives about religion.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if you want to kind of speak about that. Or...
Yeah, it's one of those things where when you look back at history, there's a famous historian, a couple, they're not with us anymore, Will and Ariel Durant, that they're famous for saying most of, how does it go again? Most of history is guessing, the rest of it is prejudice. So I just looked at this stuff and said, okay, this is what happened, and my bias and my guessing is that, yeah, these things helped us out. But it was just happy accidents, and who the fuck knows what would have happened otherwise. But then you look at like all the horrible shit that it did, and I kind of think it's been a net negative, but we can't measure it. I hate this saying, but it is what it is. It happened. all we can do is try and make things better for the future. And I think, yeah, we absolutely can do without this stuff moving forward. And that I think it should be more relegated, if not to the trash heap, but to, like I said, entertainment value, something that people just do for personal reasons rather than any type of major organization that tries to guide humanity. We don't need that fucking guidance. We can use our own brains.
Thank you very much, James. Thanks for all your wonderful thoughts today and for joining us.
That was fun. I'm really
Sorry
glad.
about your hangover.
Yeah. Actually,
It's our fault.
the adrenaline perked me up a bit. I'm feeling better, so I'm probably going to crash soon.
Thanks.